Welcome to History Stories Podcast. You've sent us some really compelling history books and uncovered sources, and today, well, we're embarking on a historic road trip. We're heading to the ancient world, specifically to a place many consider the very center, the navel of it all, Delphi.
That's right, and our mission on this historic road trip is to really unpack the stories, the legends, and frankly, the enduring mystery surrounding Delphi's most famous inhabitant, the Oracle.
Yes, the Oracle of Delphi. We want to understand her power, right? Based on these history books and uncovered sources you listeners shared.
Exactly. We're going to dive into the most intriguing details from these sources, trying to figure out why this single figure held such incredible power for, well, nearly 1,000 years.
Think of this as your personal shortcut, skipping the dense textbooks to get straight to the heart of one of history's most fascinating enigmas. We'll explore the rituals, the riddles, the prophecies.
And even the science. Some surprisingly modern scientific theories attempting to explain those divine whispers.
Okay, let's get started then. This journey to actually consult the Oracle. It wasn't just a casual day trip, was it? Your sources paint a picture of a pretty major undertaking.
Oh, absolutely not. It was a significant pilgrimage. First off, before you even got near the Temple of Apollo, you had to purify yourself at the Castalian Spring.
Purification first. Okay,
Yeah.
so a ritual cleansing even before you ask your question.
Exactly. It tells you a lot about how sacred they considered the whole process, the whole place.
And then you descend the sacred way. Your sources mention this path was lined with treasuries. Sounds impressive.
It was designed to be. These weren't just storage vaults. They were elaborate structures built by different city-states. Think Athens, Corinth, Thebes, big players.
So what was their purpose? Just showing off offerings?
Well, yes, showcasing wealth and piety, definitely. But it was more than that, They were like these architectural billboards, a very public display of status, a way to assert influence right there in this Panhellenic hub.
Ah, okay. Like a competition, almost. Vying for Apollo's favor, but also showing off to each other.
Precisely, a kind of civic muscle flexing. And near the temple, there was this polygonal retaining wall. Your sources mention it held around 800 inscriptions.
800? Wow. What sort of things were inscribed there?
All sorts, really. Official decrees from the Amphictyonic League, that was the council managing Delphi, but also more personal things like records of freeing slaves dedicated to Apollo, public pronouncements, too. It shows how central Delphi was to Greek political and social life.
Right, a real hub. And main event, the Temple of Apollo itself. Iconic image, but your sources say the one we see remains of today. And I had a bit of a rough history.
It certainly did. The main structure we associate with Delphi now dates mostly to the 4th century BCE. It was rebuilt after a pretty major earthquake in 373 BCE, just flattened the previous one.
Flattened it. Ouch.
Yeah, and that wasn't the first time. An earlier one was finished around 510 BCE, and the one before that burned down in 548 BCE.
So earthquakes, fires, but they kept rebuilding on the same spot.
They did. It speaks volumes, doesn't it, about how vital they considered the sanctuary. Architecturally, it was classic Doric, 6 columns at the ends, 15 along the sides. Very imposing, very deliberate.
And not just the building itself. The entrance porch, the pronaos, it had those famous sayings carved into it, didn't it?
Yes. Know thyself, nathi soten, and nothing in excess meeden again, attributed to the 7 sages.
Still pretty good advice today, I'd say.
Absolutely, and placed right there at the threshold. A reminder before you even sought divine guidance. Know yourself, be moderate, powerful stuff.
Okay, so you've purified yourself, walked the sacred way, seen the inscriptions, absorbed the wisdom at the entrance. But actually consulting the oracle? Sounds like that involved a whole other layer of complexity. It wasn't like she had regular office hours.
Definitely not. It was incredibly restricted. Consultations only happened on the 7th day of the month, and only during the 9 warmer months.
Only 9 months. Why?
Well, the belief was that Apollo spent the winter away, off with the mythical Hyperboreans. During that time, Dionysus sort of took over Delphi, so a very specific limited window to catch Apollo.
Made access pretty precious, I imagine. Enhanced the mystique?
Exactly. And even on those specific days, there were more rituals, starting with, well, a goat.
A goat. What did a goat have to do with it?
According to your sources, they'd sprinkle the goat with cold water. If the goat trembled enough, and it had to be enough, it meant Apollo was willing to give prophecies that day.
Curiously. So if the goat just stood there, tough luck.
Pretty much. Come back next month, maybe? It's quite something, relying on a shivering goat to know if a god is available for consultation.
Wow. Okay, so let's say the goat cooperates. Apollo's in. Then what? Was the first come, first served?
Not quite. There was a strict queue, a hierarchy. Delphians themselves got first dibs.
Naturally.
Then members of the Amphictyonic League, those cities overseeing Delphi. Then other Greeks. And finally, non-Greeks, the barbarians.
So your place in the political pecking order mattered.
Hugely. And you had to pay, of course. There was a fee plus a ritual cake called a pelanos. And animal sacrifices followed. It was a whole structured process.
And I bet, as your sources hint, if you had enough money, maybe you could grease the wheels a bit. Jump the queue.
The sources certainly suggest that wealthy individuals or city-states might have tried to expedite things with larger offerings. It just underscores how valuable those prophecies were perceived to be and, the potential for human influence.
Okay, so after navigating all that, the purification, the path, the goat, the queue, the fees, the sacrifices, you finally get to the heart of it. The adyton, the inner sanctum.
Yeah.
What do your sources say about this place?
The adyton was the most sacred spot, likely underground or at least sunken, adding to the mystery. Its exact layout is debated, but key things were believed to be inside.
Like what?
The stone, for one, this egg-shaped stone supposedly marking the center, the navel of the world, linked to that myth about Zeus releasing two eagles.
Right, I remember that, where they met.
Exactly. There might also have been a golden statue of Apollo. Some accounts mention sacred armor. Things considered too holy for ordinary sight. It was meant to feel otherworldly.
And the central figure, the Pythia herself, sitting on that bronze tripod. What was the deal with the tripod and the location?
The tripod. The iconic image. She sat on it, positioned directly over what they believed was a fissure in the earth. The chasma.
The chasma. This is where the vapors came from.
That was the belief. That inspirational vapors, the pneuma, rose from this fissure, and that's what enabled her prophecy. Your sources also suggest maybe an altar nearby, burning laurel leaves, barley meal, adding to the whole sensory experience.
And the Pythia herself. Who was she? Could anyone do it?
Typically, she was a local woman from Delphi. Originally, maybe young virgins, but later tradition shifted to women over 50, past childbearing age.
Interesting shift. Why?
Possibly for reasons of ritual purity or perceived wisdom. She had to dress as a maiden, maintain chastity, basically give up her old life and dedicate herself entirely to Apollo. Plutarch mentions they could even come from respected peasant families.
So not necessarily from the elite.
Not necessarily, and sometimes during busy periods, there might have been more than one Pythia serving at the same time.
Makes sense, given the demand. So this chosen woman sits on the tripod, maybe chews laurel leaves, maybe inhales this pneuma, and then the prophecy comes out. How?
Well, the idea was she entered a trance-like state. The Greeks called it enthusiasmos, literally meaning having the god within.
Enthusiasm from God within.
Exactly. In this state, she'd utter responses believed to be Apollo's direct voice. But these utterances, they were often really cryptic, ambiguous, sometimes in formal poetry, that dactylic hexameter verse.
Like Homer.
Right. Or sometimes just in prose. Maybe even her voice changed.
Cryptic and ambiguous. That sounds potentially unhelpful if you're looking for clear answers.
Which is where the priests came in, prophety. They were nearby, listening.
The interpreters. So they took her potentially strange utterances and made sense of them.
Essentially, yes. They recorded what she said, maybe translated the prose into verse, or shaped the final message the seeker actually received. So there was definitely this layer of human interpretation, maybe even editing.
That ambiguity, though, your sources suggest it wasn't necessarily a flaw. It might have been deliberate.
Very likely. It served several purposes. First, it protected the oracle's reputation. If things didn't pan out, you could always say the interpretation was wrong, not the prophecy itself.
Clever. Shifts the blame.
Right. It also put the burden on the seeker to reflect, to figure it out. Plus, a vague prophecy could apply to lots of situations, and, it just reinforced the whole mystery of divine knowledge. It's not supposed to be straightforward.
It was a feature, not a bug. And we have some absolutely classic examples of these ambiguous prophecies from your history books and uncovered sources. Croesus, king of Lydia, his story is famous.
Croesus, yes. He tested the oracle first, didn't he? Asked what he was doing at a specific moment.
And the oracle nailed it right. Boiling a tortoise and lamb in a bronze cauldron.
Exactly. Totally convinced Croesus. So then he asks about attacking Persia and gets that classic line, if you cross the Halys River, you will destroy a great empire.
Which he assumed meant Persia's empire.
Of course. But nope. He crossed the river, attacked, and destroyed his own empire, Lydia. A brutal lesson in wishful interpretation.
Wow. Then there's Oedipus. Maybe the most tragic prophecy of all.
Oh, definitely. Told he would kill his father and marry his mother, and despite everyone's best efforts to avoid it, well, we know how that ended, really speaks to the Greek sense of inescapable fate.
Chilling. But on a brighter note, Socrates. The oracle declared him the wisest man.
Yes, a pivotal moment for philosophy. His friend asked the oracle, and the answer came back. No one wiser than Socrates. Which baffled Socrates because he felt he knew nothing.
So it spurred his whole philosophical journey.
Exactly. His quest to understand what wisdom is, leading to his famous conclusion. His wisdom was knowing that he knew nothing. All sparked by that Delphic pronouncement.
Amazing. And the Athenians versus Persia. The wooden walls prophecy. That sounds like interpretation literally changed history.
It absolutely did. Facing the massive Persian invasion, the Athenians first got a terrifying prophecy, basically doom. They pleaded again and got a second, slightly more hopeful but still cryptic one. Trust the wooden walls.
Which could mean anything.
Right. Some thought the Acropolis walls. But Themistocles argued persuasively it meant their warships, their fleet.
And he was right, leading to the victory at Salamis.
A decisive naval victory that arguably saved Greece. Shows how critical and political interpretation could be.
And one more Lycurgus, the Spartan lawgiver. What did the oracle say about him?
The Pythia apparently wasn't sure if he was a man or a god, which suggested his extraordinary status, and she supposedly gave her blessing to Sparta's unique, rather rigid constitution.
So legitimizing not just rulers, but entire political systems.
Exactly. It shows the scope of the oracle's influence. It could bestow divine sanction on laws and social structures.
It's clear the oracle was incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
Your sources point to Delphi's peak influence roughly between the 8th and 4th centuries BCE.
Yeah.
Why that period specifically? What was going on in Greece then?
That was a really dynamic time. You had the rise of the polis, the city-state becoming the dominant form of political organization. You had massive waves of Greek colonization spreading across the Mediterranean, Black Sea, and lots of conflict between these city-states.
A fragmented world, politically speaking.
Very fragmented, no central government for all of Greece. And in that context, Delphi served this unique, vital role. It was Panhellenic for all Greeks. It was seen as the voice of Apollo. So it held immense religious authority. And because religion and politics were so intertwined.
It held political authority too.
Absolutely. It was a stabilizing force in a way, a shared point of reference, a source of legitimacy in a world often lacking it.
So if you were a lawgiver like Lycurgus or Solon in Athens, getting Delphi's stamp of approval was, well, almost essential for your reforms to stick.
It seems that way from the sources, yes. It lent divine weight to their laws. Same with colonization. You really wouldn't set off to found a new city without consulting the oracle first. It was crucial for ensuring divine blessing and therefore the colony's potential success.
In big decisions like war and alliances, straight to Delphi.
Frequently, yes. Rulers and city-states brought their most critical questions there. It could even legitimize rulers like Gyges of Lydia, according to some accounts.
We saw its impact during the Persian Wars, too.
Definitely. The Wooden Walls prophecy is a prime example of how Delphi could shape outcomes in major conflicts, depending on how its words were interpreted and acted upon.
But surely, with that much power, it must have been tempting for people to try and manipulate the oracle. Your sources mention accusations of bribery.
Oh, absolutely. Power attracts influence, right? The accusation against the Alcmaeonid family that they bribed the Pythia to tell the Spartans to liberate Athens from tyrants, which happened to benefit the Alcmaeonids. That's a classic example.
Politics playing out through prophecy.
Potentially. And those lavish gifts from rulers like Croesus? Sure, piety, but maybe also an attempt to curry favor, to get a favorable response next time they ask something important. The lines could get blurry.
And the desire to control Delphi itself led to actual wars, the sacred wars.
Yes, several times. Control over the sanctuary, its wealth, its symbolic power. It was a major prize. Different Greek powers fought over it. It just highlights, again, how deeply connected religion and power politics were.
But overall, despite the politics and potential manipulation, Delphi seems to have acted as a kind of glue for the Greek world, providing stability.
I think that's fair to say, yes. It provided a shared religious framework, a source of legitimacy that often helped manage conflicts, or at least provide common ground. And its blessing for colonization helped foster that sense of a shared Greek identity across the Mediterranean.
A symbiotic relationship, almost. Delphi sanctions expansion. Successful expansion boosts Delphi's prestige.
Exactly. But as we saw with Croesus, that ambiguity, that potential for misinterpretation, It could also backfire spectacularly. It wasn't a foolproof system.
Right. It could be a catalyst for disaster, too.
Yeah.
It's just a fascinating look at how religion and politics worked back then.
It truly is a complex dance.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit to maybe the most debated aspect, the source of the Pythia's trance. The ancient Greeks believed it was Apollo, divine possession. But modern science, as your sources detail, has looked underground, haven't they, in the geology?
This is where it gets really interesting. The ancient belief was firm. Apollo spoke through the Pythia, enabled by this pneuma, this vapor or breath rising from a chasma, a fissure in the earth inside the adyton. Plutarch even described the pneuma as sweet-smelling.
And there were myths reinforcing this, like the Python.
Yes, the myth linked the pneuma to the decomposing body of the monstrous python slain by Apollo there. And there was that story, maybe anecdotal, about goats acting strangely near a fissure, seemingly becoming prophetic themselves. It all pointed to something coming from the earth.
But for a long time, modern scholars kind of dismissed all that, didn't they?
They did. For much of the 20th century, early French archaeologists didn't find one obvious big gaping chasm under the temple ruins. Plus, there was this mistaken idea that gas emissions like that only happened in volcanic areas, which Delphi isn't. So the pneuma got written off as myth.
Until geology took another look.
Exactly. In the 1980s and 90s, geologist Gilles Zeelinga de Boer did work there. He identified active fault lines, the Delphi Fault and the Kurna Fault, intersecting right beneath the temple site.
Fault lines. Okay, that changes things.
It provides a potential geological mechanism. The Kurna Fault was even linked to local springs, including the sacred Cassotis spring, whose waters were supposedly used by the Pythia. So maybe the chasma wasn't one big hole, but a network of smaller fissures linked to these faults.
So the faults could be the where. What about the what? What kind of gases might have come out?
De Boer teamed up with others, an archaeologist John Hale, a chemist Jeffrey Chanton, a toxicologist Henry Spiller. A real interdisciplinary effort. Their theory was that seismic activity along these faults could heat up the local rock.
Which is what kind of rock?
Bituminous limestone. Rich in hydrocarbons, heating it could vaporize lighter gases trapped inside, which could then seep up through the fissures into the adyton.
Hydrocarbon gases. Did they find evidence of them?
Yes. They analyzed water from the springs and travertine deposits, that's mineral deposits left by water, and they found light hydrocarbon gases, methane, ethane, and significantly, ethylene.
Ethylene. That's the one that gets talked about most in this theory, right? Why ethylene?
Several reasons. It fits the geological possibility. Crucially, it has a slightly sweet smell, matching Plutarch's description of the pneuma. And perhaps the biggest piece, ethylene was actually used as an anesthetic in the 20th century.
And anesthetics, so it affects consciousness.
Exactly. At low doses, it can induce a kind of trance-like state, euphoria, detachment, altered awareness, but potentially still allowing articulate speech. That sounds a lot like some descriptions of the Pythia.
And at higher doses.
It could cause agitation, confusion, maybe even the incoherence mentioned in some later accounts of the Oracle. Strabo's mention of divine frenzy could fit too.
So the ethylene theory provides this scientifically plausible link between Delphi's unique geology and the ancient accounts of the Pythia's state.
It does. It suggests the Greeks weren't just making things up, they were observing a real phenomenon, even if they interpreted it through a divine lens. It's a fascinating potential convergence.
But, as always, it's not quite case closed, is it? Your sources make it clear there's still a big debate, divine haze or earthly fumes, or something else entirely.
Definitely still debated. While the gas theory is really compelling, some scholars push back. People like Joseph Fontenrose, Lisa Maurizio, they argue that the image we often have now of a totally delirious, raving Pythia needing priests to translate gibberish might be a later exaggeration.
How so?
They point to earlier sources, like Herodotus. He often depicts the Pythia speaking quite clearly, sometimes even in perfect verse. That challenges the idea she was just completely overcome by fumes.
So maybe if gases were involved, their effect was more subtle, not total incapacitation.
Possibly. Maybe it induced a state more conducive to what they perceived as divine insight, maybe heightened intuition without causing total delirium. There are also technical questions. Could ethylene have been present consistently in stable concentrations over centuries? Some geochemists doubt that.
And are there other geological theories besides ethylene?
Yes. Luigi Picardi suggested maybe episodic bursts of CO2, carbon dioxide, or hydrogen sulfide, triggered by earthquakes, that could cause hypoxia oxygen deprivation in a small space like the adyton. Another team, led by Giuseppe Etiope, confirmed methane and ethane are still emitted nearby and suggested maybe benzene as a sweet-smelling candidate, though they noted a lack of current hydrocarbon discharge right at the temple. So the specific gas, or even if gas was the primary factor, is still debated.
And then there's the role of the priests, the propheti. We keep coming back to them.
You have to. Regardless of the Pythia state, whether divinely inspired, mildly intoxicated, or perfectly lucid, the priests were the gatekeepers of the message. They recorded it, interpreted it, maybe shaped it.
Giving plenty of scope for political influence or catering to rich patrons.
Yeah.
Like those alleged bribes.
Exactly. Human interpretation, human agendas were always part of the process. We can't discount that.
And we shouldn't forget the power of belief itself, right? The whole atmosphere, the rituals.
Absolutely crucial. The intense belief system of the Greeks, the drama of the pilgrimage and the rituals, the setting itself, dim light, incense, chanting, all of that would have had a powerful psychological effect on both the Pythia and the seeker. Heightened suggestibility, awe.
Any evidence for, like, actual drugs beyond chewing laurel leaves?
Well, common bay laurel isn't really psychoactive, but other plants grew in the area, like oleander, which is toxic and potentially hallucinogenic if ingested carefully. It's speculative, but possible some other pharmacological aid was sometimes involved.
So the real answer is probably complicated. A mix of factors.
Almost certainly. It's likely a combination, maybe some geological gas influence, definitely the powerful religious belief and ritual, the psychology of the individuals involved, and the crucial layer of human interpretation by the priests. It's the interplay that makes it so endlessly fascinating.
And even though the Oracle fell silent ages ago, her legacy,
wow,
it's immense. Your sources show its echoes in philosophy, literature, art, our whole culture, really.
It's truly profound. Think about philosophy again. Socrates, his whole method, sparked by her words about his wisdom, driving him to embody know thyself. Heraclitus using her ambiguity as a metaphor for divine communication. She forced Greeks to wrestle with fate, free will, the limits of knowing.
And she's all over Greek tragedy.
Absolutely central. Sophocles' Oedipus Rex is maybe the prime example, but also Aeschylus's Oresteia, Euripides' Ion. Her prophecies drive the plots, raise the stakes, explore these timeless human questions. She was a narrative engine.
And artists depicted her, too. From ancient Greek faces right up to Michelangelo.
Yes, she appears on ancient pottery. The sanctuary itself was filled with masterpieces like the Charioteer of Delphi, and the idea of the Delphic Sibyl, the prophetess, was so powerful that centuries later, Michelangelo included her among the prophets on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Quite the leap.
But eventually her time passed, what led to the decline in the end, according to your sources.
Roman rule gradually reduced Delphi's political clout, though it remained religiously important for a time. The real turning point was the rise of Christianity. As paganism faded, so did the authority of its oracles.
When was the very last prophecy?
The last recorded one is around 393 CE. Apparently it was quite melancholy, lamenting that Apollo's hall had fallen silent, his laurel gone, the prophetic spring dried up. A sad end.
And then the official shutdown.
Yes, Emperor Theodosius I in the late 4th century outlawed pagan practices across the empire that effectively silenced the oracle for good.
And Delphi itself was kind of lost for centuries.
Largely forgotten, yeah.
Yep.
Buried, eventually built over by a village. It wasn't until the 19th century that archaeologists, first Germans, then a huge French excavation starting in 1892, uncovered the site again. That's what allows all the modern study.
And incredibly, the name Delphi still pops up today, like the Delphi method for forecasting.
It does. It lives on in surprising ways. In modern thrillers, historical fiction, even movies like The Matrix, video games like Assassin's Creed Odyssey, the Oracle's mystique endures.
And the scientific debate about the gas theory shows we're still trying to understand her, doesn't it?
For sure. The Oracle remains this powerful metaphor, I think, for our own desire to know what's coming, to make sense of ambiguity, to grapple with that line between reason and the things we can't quite explain.
Well, our historic road trip to Delphi is coming to an end. Thanks to the fantastic history books and uncovered sources you all shared, I feel like we have a much richer picture of this incredible place and its oracle. We've seen how belief, politics, maybe even geology, it all wove together to create this enduring power.
Reflecting on this journey through the sources, what really stands out now? Are you leaning more towards the divine, the earthly fumes, or like me, thinking it's probably that complex mix?
It's definitely complex. The story of Delphi just reminds us that the past is full of these fascinating puzzles, doesn't it? Mysteries that keep us talking, keep us thinking even today.
Absolutely. And if this historic road trip has sparked your interest to explore further, we've put together a list of resources, books, documentaries, even some relevant fiction in the show notes, so you can continue your own journey into Delphi.
And here's a final thought to carry with you. Think about how we, today, still look for our own kinds of oracles. Maybe it's data analysis, expert forecasts, maybe just a gut feeling. Are we really so different from the ancient Greeks seeking guidance in uncertain times? Have those fundamental human needs truly changed?
It's a great question. Thank you for joining us on this historic road trip to Delphi. Definitely share this story if you know someone who loves a good historical mystery. And please rate and follow History Stories podcast for more captivating stories from the world of flash culture.